but what I saw revealed everything I needed to know about the person I was dealing with. Yet the moment that would truly define this confrontation, and show why Judge Caprio had earned the respect of an entire city, was still ahead. Judge Caprio rose from his chair, a rare gesture during proceedings. The simple act commanded such attention that the courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. "Mr. Stevens, I want to tell you a story," Judge Caprio said, walking around his desk to stand directly before the bench. 50 years ago, my family came to this country with nothing but hope and a willingness to work. We lived in a small apartment owned by a man named Mr. Geppy Romano. The apartment wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and warm. When my father struggled to pay rent during a harsh winter, Mr. Romano didn't evict us. Instead, he gave my father odd jobs around the building until he could get back on his feet. Stevens looked puzzled, unsure where this story was heading. "Your Honor, I'm not sure what this has to do with—" "It has everything to do with why you are standing in my courtroom today," Judge Caprio interrupted, his voice rising with measured intensity. "Mr. Romano understood something that you seem to have forgotten. Being a landlord isn't just about collecting money. It's about being part of a community. It's about recognizing that the people who pay you rent aren't merely sources of income. They are your neighbors, and their success or failure affects everyone." The judge paused, letting the words resonate throughout the courtroom. "Mr. Romano helped build this community. You, Mr. Stevens, are parasiting on it." Stevens' lawyer was now frantically trying to get his client's attention, but Stevens seemed frozen, weighed down by the moral force of Judge Caprio's words. "Your Honor," Stevens finally muttered, his voice noticeably weaker. "I understand that you have strong feelings, but I've done nothing illegal." Judge Caprio's response would reveal the difference between legality and morality, a distinction that separates true leaders from those who merely occupy positions of authority. Judge Caprio returned to his seat, yet his presence seemed to fill the entire courtroom. "Mr. Stevens, you are correct in saying that most of your actions fall within the narrow bounds of what is legal. But this courtroom is not solely about enforcing the minimum requirements of the law. It is about upholding the highest standards of human decency." He reached for another file, noticeably thicker than the first. "I've been doing some research, Mr. Stevens. Did you know that over the past 5 years, you have been involved in more than 40 eviction proceedings? Did you know that your properties have received more code violation complaints than any other landlord in Providence? Did you know that 3 families were hospitalized due to carbon monoxide exposure caused by faulty heating systems in your buildings?" With each revelation, Stevens seemed to shrink further. The confident, dismissive man who had entered the courtroom was now being systematically dismantled by facts he had hoped would never come to light. "But what troubles me most, Mr. Stevens," Judge Caprio continued, his voice imbued with full moral authority, "is that every time one of these situations arose, every time a family suffered due to your negligence, you had a choice. You could have seen it as an opportunity to improve, to act better. Instead, you treated it as merely the cost of doing business." Stevens opened his mouth to speak, but Judge Caprio raised a hand. "I am not finished, Mr. Stevens, because what you fail to understand is this. Every choice you made, every time you ignored a repair request, every time you dismissed a family's concerns, every time you prioritized profit over their safety, you weren't just failing them. You were failing the entire community, a community that relies on people like you to rise above your worst impulses." But the moment that would truly reveal Stevens' character, and showcase Judge Caprio's legendary ability to expose truth through compassion, was about to arrive. Judge Caprio reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a photograph. He held it up so Stevens could see it clearly. "Mr. Stevens, do you recognize this little girl?" Stevens squinted at the photograph, confusion evident across his face. "No, Your Honor, I do not. This is Maria Santos," Judge Caprio said, his voice steady but piercing. "She is 7 years old. She lived in one of your properties on Federal Hill until 3 weeks ago, when her family was forced to move after the ceiling in her bedroom collapsed due to a leak that you refused to repair for 8 months. Judge Caprio's voice softened, yet somehow gained even more authority. "Maria drew this picture for me yesterday when her mother brought her to my office." He held up a child's drawing depicting a house beneath dark clouds with a sad face in one of the windows. "She wanted me to show it to the man who owned her home because she hoped that if he saw how unhappy she was, he might fix it so no other children would have to be frightened at night." The courtroom fell completely silent. Many spectators were visibly moved, and even Stevens appeared affected by the innocence of the gesture. "Maria doesn't understand property law, Mr. Stevens. She doesn't understand profit margins or maintenance budgets. But she grasped something you seem to have forgotten. She knows that homes are where families build their dreams. And when you damage someone's home, you aren't just harming property, you are harming hope. Stevens glanced from the drawing to Judge Caprio and back again. For the first time since entering the courtroom, his face revealed something beyond arrogance or calculation. It showed recognition. Comment below if you think Judge Caprio's style of justice, blending legal authority with moral guidance, is what our system needs more of. Share this video if you believe in holding people accountable not only to the law but also to basic human decency. Judge Caprio carefully set Maria's drawing on his desk, keeping it in Stevens' view. Mr. Stevens, I could impose the maximum penalties allowed by law. I could fine you, order restitution, even recommend jail time for some of your violations. But punishment without understanding doesn't create change. It only breeds resentment. Stevens looked up, a flicker of hope appearing in his eyes for the first time. Your Honor, if there's anything I can do to make this right, there is, Mr. Stevens, Judge Caprio replied, his tone now carrying possibility instead of condemnation. But it requires you to understand that being a landlord is not just a business. It is a responsibility to the community. It demands that you view your tenants not as sources of income, but as neighbors whose well-being affects the entire fabric of our city. Judge Caprio rose again, though his stance was now less confrontational and more instructional. I'm going to give you a choice, Mr. Stevens. You can accept the maximum penalties, pay your fines, and continuing to operate exactly as you have been. Or you can collaborate with the city's housing authority to bring all of your properties up to not just the minimum standards, but exemplary ones. Can implement a tenant relations program that handles concerns with respect and urgency. You can become part of the solution to Providence's housing challenges rather than part of the problem. Stevens glanced around the courtroom, perhaps finally realizing that his choice would be observed by an entire community. Your Honor, what would that actually entail? But Judge Caprio's final challenge would determine whether Stevens was truly prepared to change or merely seeking the easier path. Judge Caprio returned to his seat and fixed his gaze directly on Stevens. It requires something that might be harder for you than any fine I could levy, Mr. Stevens. It requires humility. It requires acknowledging that the way you've been operating has caused real harm to real families. It requires a commitment to do better, not because the law demands it but because it is the right thing to do. The judge paused, letting the gravity of his words resonate. If you take this path, you will be supervised by the housing authority for 2 years. Every complaint will be investigated immediately. Every repair request will be addressed within 48 hours. You will attend monthly meetings with tenant representatives from your properties, and you will contribute to a fund that helps families displaced by substandard housing secure temporary accommodations while their homes are repaired. Stevens absorbed this, clearly calculating the financial impact. And if you meet all these requirements, you will have accomplished something remarkable, Mr. Stevens, Judge Caprio said with a subtle smile. You will have transformed from someone who views housing as a means to extract money from people into someone who sees it as a way to provide stability and dignity to families. You will have become the kind of landlord that communities need rather than the kind they suffer under. Judge Caprio lifted Maria's drawing once more. But most importantly, Mr. Stevens, you will be able to look at images like this and know that because of your actions, fewer children will draw sad faces in windows. They will draw homes filled with warmth, safety, and hope. Stevens remained quiet for a long moment. The arrogance that had defined his earlier demeanor completely vanished. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm yet distinct. Your Honor, I choose to cooperate with the housing authority. The change in Stevens' demeanor illustrated why Judge Caprio's method of justice, holding people accountable while providing a chance for redemption, had earned him not only respect as a jurist but recognition as a model of leadership far beyond the courtroom. Judge Caprio nodded slowly, a look of satisfaction crossing his face. Mr. Stevens, I will hold you to this commitment, not because I doubt you, but because the families residing in your properties deserve assurance that this change is genuine and lasting. He turned to Stevens' attorney. Counsel, please ensure your client understands that this agreement will be entered into the court record. Any violation of these terms will trigger the immediate application of maximum penalties for all current charges, along with additional contempt citations. The lawyer nodded, relief evident now that his client had chosen cooperation over confrontation. Judge Caprio then addressed the entire courtroom. What we have witnessed today is something I see too infrequently in this courtroom, an individual choosing to be better than their worst behavior. Mr. Stevens entered here today believing that mere legal compliance was sufficient. He is leaving with an understanding that true success in business and life requires adherence to moral standards as well. As Stevens prepared to exit the courtroom, Judge Caprio called him back. "Mr. Stevens, one more thing." He extended Maria's drawing. "I want you to keep this, not as a punishment, but as a reminder of what is at stake whenever you make decisions about the properties you manage." Stevens accepted the drawing, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor. I won't let you down." "Don't worry about disappointing me, Mr. Stevens," Judge Caprio replied, his tone now warm, a sharp contrast to the earlier severity. "Worry about letting down the families who rely on you to provide safe, dignified homes. Keep them in mind with every decision you make and you will never fail this court." As Stevens left the courtroom, spectators began murmuring among themselves, reflecting on what they had just observed. But Judge Caprio was not finished. He had one final lesson to impart. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the gallery, "what you have witnessed today is why I continue to have faith in the power of our legal system, not merely as a mechanism to punish wrongdoing, but as a tool to inspire better choices." Mr. Stevens entered this courtroom seeing his tenants as sources of income. He is leaving understanding that being a landlord is truly about being a caretaker of other people's hopes and dreams. Judge Caprio scanned the courtroom, making eye contact with as many individuals as he could. "That transformation didn't occur because I threatened him with penalties. It happened because we took the time to show him the human consequences of his decisions. That is what genuine leadership looks like, not compelling obedience through fear, but fostering it through understanding." Hit subscribe and share this video if you believe that true justice is not only about punishment, but about transformation. Judge Caprio's approach reminds us that real leadership is about guiding people to become better versions of themselves, not merely making them pay for their worst actions. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Judge Caprio remained at his bench, reviewing the next case on his docket. Yet those who had witnessed Marcus Stevens' transformation carried a lesson far beyond housing regulations or courtroom procedure. They saw what occurs when authority is exercised with wisdom, when power is tempered with compassion, and when leadership is defined not by the ability to enforce compliance, but by the ability to redeem. The man who had walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom laughing left with humility, a lesson that would reshape not only his approach to business, but also his understanding of community responsibility. Once again, Judge Frank Caprio demonstrated why his courtroom is renowned not for the severity of its judgments, but for the depth of its humanity. In a world where authority is often mistaken for authoritarianism, where power is frequently separated from responsibility, Judge Caprio's handling of Marcus Stevens serves as a reminder that true leadership is not about commanding respect. It is about earning it through consistent wisdom, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to human dignity. The laughter that echoed at the start of the proceedings had been replaced by something far more meaningful, the sound of a man accepting accountability not only for his legal obligations, but also for his moral responsibilities. And in that transformation, everyone present witnessed not only effective jurisprudence, but extraordinary leadership in action.